Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I am the editorial director at Worn and Wound. Really happy to be joined today by Griffin Bartsch, Worn and Wound contributor. Griffin, how's it going today?
It's going absolutely great. It's a perfect fall day in New England, so it's cold and a little gray.
Yeah, it's really dreary in New Hampshire right now. I know you're in Providence, right? Currently. Yeah. So we're experiencing the same weather pattern. It's gross. That's the only way to put it. It's just damp and gray. And yeah, we've passed peak fall, I think, by a mile at this point. And now it's just hibernation season here.
I would agree with that. Although
that's where we're at.
I do feel like we had a nice long fall this year. So, we got a pretty good...
It's never long enough for me. I was just saying to a friend of mine, like, I love fall. I hate winter. I don't even really like New England summers because of it's too hot. I don't enjoy the humidity. So there's like 6 weeks of really great weather that I look forward to every year. And I'm always just like very sad when it passes. And I think it's passed. So
it's definitely passed. And we didn't even get the nicety. Our colleagues in New York got snow this week and we got none of that.
Yep. It's well, I mean, that's fine. I'm happy to put the snow off for as long as possible. I'm knocking on all the wood right now. Let's hope that let's hope it never comes. That's my hope. Griffin, we're going to talk about a couple of things on this episode. We're going to talk about auctions. We're speaking just a few days removed from big auction in Switzerland. Phillips Box and Russo auction. They had their 10-year anniversary auction, or 10 years of Box and Russo auction, and a very important Patek Philippe 1518 was sold for a very kind of like mind-boggling amount of money. There were also a lot of other I think interesting sales happened in this auction that we're going to talk about. You're working on a piece sort of like about this auction season that'll be on the site soon, perhaps by the time this podcast goes live. So we'll discuss kind of like the current state of things with respect to auctions. We're also going to talk about just our very first impressions on GPHG 2025, which, as we speak right now on Thursday, November 13th, the ceremony has just ended, just within the last, I think, hour or so. So we can talk about the winners and get some early maybe hot takes or lukewarm takes on the GPHG results. And I think we have some cultural recommendations, as we usually do as well. But before we do any of that, Griffin, what are you wearing today? What do you got on wrist?
Well, I'm wearing a fun watch that I just reviewed. I'm wearing the Christopher Ward Jump Hour Mark V that came out last week as of the time of the recording.
Yeah, that's a very cool piece.
Yeah.
You like this quite a bit. It was interesting to read your review because you wrote about it a little bit as like a Christopher Ward outsider, which is a nice perspective because I feel like at Worn and Wound we cover Christopher Ward a lot. They're one of our favorite brands. Obviously, they're a partner of ours, in the wind-up watch fairs for years now. We've done limited editions with them, and we just like them. I think it's, fair to say that. You have a little less kind of exposure to the brand. So it's interesting to kind of like hear your take as like sort of a, like a normal person who might not, like be in touch with like the Christopher Ward team on a regular basis, for example.
Yeah, there's definitely... That was a big part of it for me because I've been impressed with what Christopher Ward has been doing for the last few years, but they're not a brand that has been making watches that have felt particularly for me. Mm-hmm. And they're just a brand that they're doing all the things the right way. They've just been doing all the things the right way outside of what I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah.
I can appreciate a bel canto. I can appreciate some of the really crazy stuff they're doing. I can appreciate a Trident and some of the more bread and butter stuff they're doing. But my interests have tended to fall somewhere between those two extremes. And I just haven't felt like they've hit me square on yet. And this watch is doing a lot to bring me into the brand.
Yeah, this watch is interesting because I feel like it sort of sits somewhere between like the more kind of like sort of like classic Christopher Ward stuff, like the Trident and those watches that are, just kind of like straightforward, kind of like simple watches, and the more it's between that and like kind of like the more avant-garde, like the bel canto, the Loco, some of like the cool like sapphire and aventurine dials they've done. This one feels like it's kind of like smack in the middle in a lot of ways. But yeah, no, it's a cool piece. It seems like it's getting getting some appreciation too from a broader broader audience. They've done jump hours for a long time, so it's kind of it's nice to see one back in the collection. It's kind of like a core complication for them.
Yeah, well, if you look back, as you said, they've been doing jump hours for a long time. Their jump hour module was really the first sign that they were heading in the direction that they've now gone. And so it not existing in their own collection, the only way you've been able to get a Christopher Ward jump hour for the last few years has been to buy a Fears. It makes sense, and it feels right that it's now back kind of at home.
Yeah. There's also some symmetry there with the Belcanto. Of course, the movement for the Belcanto is based on that jump hour module. It's essentially a modification of the jump hour functionality. So yeah, it's a cool piece. We'll, of course, leave a link to your review of that. Also, there's some really cool photography of the watch in that review. It's definitely an interesting kind of like loom execution on that watch, which is a lot of fun. And they just released a watch today, a new version of the Belcanto, the Belcanto Lumiere, which is just crazy loom. I haven't seen that one in person, so I can't really make a call on that. But the photos are cool. We'll link to that one as well in the show notes.
The exciting, and then there's always the exciting thing that, I mean, I would imagine we'll see that watch at some point or another. But this time next month, anyone in New York will be able to see it anytime because their boutique is opening. So they'll be around.
Yep. They're onward and upward for Christopher Ward. Only good things from them over these last few years, really. They've been on an incredible hot streak, incredible run. I'm wearing today my Louis Erard Atelier Oui collaboration. This is the regulator. This is my first Louis Erard. I picked this up maybe like 2 or 3 years ago now. A watch that I had like a real fascination with when I first saw it, when it was first released. And I eventually found one on the pre-owned market for a fair price, and it's just been like an object of fascination for a long time. I have to admit, I don't wear this watch all that often. Like it's just not one that I reach for very much, but every time I do wear it, I'm just like, I'm blown away by the dial. Like, to me, this is like exactly the right kind of, it just like hits all the like kind of like avant-garde sensibilities that I like in a dial. We'll leave a photo of it in the show notes for folks to check out, but it has no numerals. It's basically just like a series of like facets, essentially, like fanning around the dial, and it looks sort of chaotic and like you wouldn't necessarily be able to like read the time from it, but they're set at 5-minute intervals, and like once you actually sort of get accustomed to that, it's actually like fairly intuitive to read the time. And it's just like the texture itself, like the way that everything is sort of like cut into the dial, it's just very, very precise, very satisfying. So yeah, I've been wearing that for the last 2 days or so. It's just a cool watch.
That's a watch I very much associate with you, but also I feel like that watch was kind of came at an interesting point in your collecting and marked a bit of a turning point for you.
Maybe a little bit, yeah. I definitely. So like I talked about this watch and thought about this watch for a long time before I actually bought it. And I think there was like a lead up to me, like actually like pulling the trigger on it, where my taste was changing quite a bit. And it's sort of like definitely, you can probably, I haven't done this, maybe I should, but you can probably like trace a path from this to like a bunch of other kind of like stranger, more kind of like design forward or artistic sort of watches that sort of live in that sort of like approachable independent sphere that we like to talk about a lot. And this watch is very much in that wheelhouse, I think. All right, so let's turn to the auction world. Griffin, you're working on a piece kind of covering sort of like, well, tell us about what you're working on for the website about auctions. Maybe we can start there.
Well, it's sort of a bit of a look back and a look ahead. We're at a really interesting point in the auction year where we've just finished up these major auctions. We've just finished up these in Geneva, and then we're less than a month away from some pretty significant auctions in New York. So it's all getting busy, and it's all to the end of the year. And the attention has all been on Geneva because of I think it's fair to say pretty much one watch, even though that's a little unfair to a lot of the other incredible watches that were for sale in Geneva this past weekend. But it's hard not to be interested in a stainless steel 1518. It's probably the definitive auction watch of the last decade in some ways, in part because let's put it this way. It's the only watch in the top 5. Let me rephrase that. It's the most expensive watch ever sold at auction that was for neither charity nor owned by Paul Newman.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, it's a legitimately important watch. So the 1518, of course, is maybe among the most important, if not the most important, Patek Philippe references ever. It's their perpetual calendar chronograph. It's waterproof, which was a big deal when this watch was introduced. And in steel, of course, it's just incredibly rare. There's, I think, like 4 known in the world.
There are 4 known, and at this point, we're pretty sure that that's because there are only 4.
Yeah. So it was very unusual for Patek Philippe to make complicated watches in steel, at this time, and still to this day. So there are, of course, more 1518s and precious metals. They're still very rare. You can very easily account for all of them that have ever been produced if you pour through the archives. And in fact, there are a couple other 1518 in this auction, in this sale, that I think we can talk about that are pretty notable. But the steel one is kind of like the ultimate, like the grail of grails. So the entire auction season has kind of been pivoting around this watch. The estimate before the auction was just in excess of 8 million CHF. It's sold for 14,190 CHF, which is even more in US dollars. It's not that much more than this watch sold for in, I think, was it 2016 that this very watch sold at auction before?
It sold for about 11 million Swiss francs in 2016.
Yeah. So someone who is more, in tune with like economics can do like the calculation on how the currency has changed, between now and then and inflation. But, it's not a dramatic increase just in terms of raw dollar amounts or Swiss franc amounts in this case. And the owner may or may not have had a huge windfall depending on the currency they paid for the watch in. Or so it's a little complicated there, but still it's an eye-watering amount, no matter how you put it. Like it's
a staggering figure. And I mean, I think I put in my draft jokingly that if the new owner of the watch is unfortunate enough to live in the United States, he may have to pay upwards of $20 million to actually get the watch in hand.
Right.
So it is the kind of money that you can kind of only talk about in the abstract.
Yeah. What do you think of when you hear about or read about or even see, because this was live streamed to the entire world, like what goes through your head when you see a watch sold for this amount of money? How does it make you feel about the industry? Like, does it make you feel like, like, oh my God, like what are we doing here? This is just insane, like for a steel watch. Or does it make you think like watches are maturing? Like this is becoming more like the art market or like the classic car. I think that like I oscillate between the two. Like I think that watches are important, obviously. And, I want the market to mature. I want watches to be, understood as these like historic, important objects that command a lot of money when they're like legitimately rare. But on the other hand, like this is a steel watch that, the value is like entirely tied to its rarity. And I don't know exactly how to process that. But what are your thoughts?
I think I have 2 parallel trains of thinking. I think for a watch like this, that is genuinely rare, not rare in the way we often use the term rare.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, auction houses often use the term rare. This is a watch where, several hundred 1518s were made, and only 4 of them are steel.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a watch that is desirable just in isolation. It's an early perpetual calendar chronograph from Patek Philippe. It's still probably the best looking perpetual calendar chronograph Patek Philippe has made, which I do think accounts for some of the interest in the 1518 in general.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the rare version of it. Like, it's about as rare a watch as a watch can get without it being on purpose that it's rare.
Right. Even though there were only 4 of them, it is still technically a serially produced watch. So
exactly. And it's not a piece unique made for only watch. It's just they made 4 of them, probably because they had a couple customers who wanted them in steel, and they're a great watch. And in that sense, this is where the comparison between the watch market and the traditional fine art market feels at its truest. Where the auctions lose me, and I'm a big proponent of auctions, is when we start seeing, I almost get more skeptical of an auction when I see something like a 5711 going for $500,000, and it's like, well, that's just a totally serially produced watch. There's plenty of them.
mm-hmm.
That feels more concerning to me than a genuinely rare vintage watch going for a staggering amount of money.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that that's, one thing we can give credit to Phillips and Box and Russo to with this particular sale is like there really is not a lot of like modern like hype stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are some modern watches in here, but they're interesting, to use that word that auction houses and watch people love to use for one reason or another. Like you don't see like mass produced like Rolex in here really for the most part. At least nothing that caught my eye. Possibly I missed something, but everyone like you'll see that in auctions from time to time. You'll see like a Submariner or something that was made last year, in line with like important vintage watches, and like they like why is this watch selling for more than like significantly more than retail or significantly more than market price in an auction where you have to pay buyer's premium and other things. Like that's a thing that I think drives people crazy about auctions. And there's a evaporation of trust, I think, that sometimes happens when people see that, and they people get suspicious. But to Phillips's credit, the watches in this sale are like genuinely like pretty important. Like they pulled out all the stops for like what they advertise as like an important sale of important watches.
Yeah, and I think it's fundamentally very cool that the watch that followed up this 1518 in the sale was an Eterna chronograph with an estimate of 2,000 to 4,000 Swiss francs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, admittedly, it wound up selling for closer to 10,000 Swiss francs. It was in great condition. It's a beautiful watch. But I do think at their best, auctions celebrate watches that would be impossible to actually price. I mean, everyone knows a 1518 in steel is an incredibly valuable watch, but if this wound up in a dealer's hands, they would have no ability to price it and actually sell it. So that's where auctions actually become a valuable tool for setting a market for a watch like this.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that a dealer would love a chance to price it if they could, because I mean, that's where you potentially see that huge windfall. But no, you're 100% right. An auction really is like a gauge of what a watch is actually worth to real people. A watch has to have at least 2 interested parties, to generate a result like this. And I think there were, did you watch the auction? Did you catch the live stream? I think I heard that there were like 5 to 8 like bidders, actively bidding on the watch at one point. Does that check out to you?
I obviously wasn't in the room for this, but I did watch it live. The timing worked out perfectly because it was happening during the F1 sprint race this weekend, and the race happened to be red flagged and stopped right when this watch came to the block. So it had my full attention. Aurel Box wasn't done doing his little presentation for the watch before someone screamed out an $8 million bid.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And yeah, there were a handful of bidders. It seemed to come down to a bidder on the phone and a bidder in the room. And I think what Aurel does really well, that is he takes his time and he's really willing to be patient. He understands the pressure. I mean, I don't care how much money you have. When the bidding gets to 10, 12, 14 million dollars, you have to be thinking and doing some back of the napkin math and figuring out if this is a good idea.
Yeah, and you have to be thinking about how that all breaks down in terms of, you know, the fees and the structure of it. Yeah. Like that's something that he's keeping in his head, running through the entire time. He is really fun to watch. I have to say, like, if you haven't watched his sale of Paul Newman Daytona, like that is like kind of, I think, required viewing for any watch interested person. Yeah, like he's a showman, and I think he really does like truly like live and breathe this stuff. And like he really understands it, and like that's important, I think, for someone in his position. He's more than just like an auctioneer. Like obviously he is like he has a deep connection and a deep knowledge of every watch that's, you know, being sold. And this is a sale of over how many lots were there? There was over 200 lots, and he has to have a command of every single one.
Yeah, over 200 lots done over 2 days. I mean, this is one of those things. Phillips puts together an incredible sale every time. And now the other auction houses are catching up, and they're catching up really effectively. But when Aurel Box started doing these watch auctions for Phillips a decade ago, he set a very high bar. And in some ways, the rest of the industry is kind of only just catching up. And a sale like this demonstrates how good his team is.
Yeah. For sure. Before we get into just some of the other notable lots, I think we've each kind of like picked out a handful of watches that we can talk about that's sold at Phillips. I wanted to ask you if you care to weigh in on any of the controversy surrounding this watch. Of course, you know, it wouldn't be a high-end Swiss watch auction or a watch auction anywhere in the world for that matter if there weren't folks kind of like sniping about condition and authenticity of the watches, you know, kind of like in the marquee. And this Patek Philippe 1518 is no exception. There have been, you know, insinuations that the dial has been perhaps excessively washed or redone entirely. This is one of the things that I think turns people off or makes people scared of vintage watches in general, and particularly auctions. So it's important to remind people that auction houses work for the client, who is the seller. They don't necessarily have the buyer's interest at heart, which isn't to say that they don't care, but you know, they make money. They're working with the consignor. You know, that's the relationship. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or sort of like the way that this sometimes plays out with the kind of bombs being thrown about condition on a watch like this.
Yeah, I think this is where we see just how nascent the watch market really is. In most other markets, whether it be high-end cars or art or furniture or even wine, there's a real sense of what is acceptable restoration and what's not. And what do you have to disclose and what don't you? And I think a lot of the conflict that comes up around auctions. Now, sometimes, before I say this, stuff comes up at auction and people figure things out, and it raises real questions about the whole thing. But I do think a lot of the time, you know, who's to say that the dial shouldn't have been maintained to a certain standard, even if it's less original than it might be? To my understanding, all the parts still go together. So whether or not it's restored becomes a bigger question for the guy who just forked over $17 million to buy the watch than for me.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I always think about is like, the internet commenters and the internet, like sleuths who kind of like, quote unquote uncover a lot of this stuff. They do so at a distance. A lot of times they don't have like, full access to the watch. Someone who's going to spend, 14 million CHF on one of these watches presumably has had a chance to inspect it, had a chance to see it. And they, you would think that they're not just, throwing bad money around, like it's, you want to give someone who's spending that kind of money, like a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. I think that they're not completely clueless and that they've maybe done their due diligence and that it's not a mystery to them, like what the condition of the dial actually is, and that they've accepted it and they're okay with it, regardless of whether it's been, altered or washed or, whatever the accusation is. And something I've said about vintage watches for a long time is I used to collect vintage watches much more regularly, and I kind of like got just exhausted from the the conversation around originality, and I used to be obsessive about it. I would not want to own a watch that was polished or had a redone dial in any way. And I've really like turned around on that, and I've kind of like just accepted that most watches have had something done to them, and you should just enjoy the watch for the watch and still be aware of what you're buying. But it's nice to be able to appreciate something for what it is. And this is like the most extreme example of that potentially, for a 14 million CHF, Patek Philippe 1518. But, I don't know. I think that people should be free to spend their money how they want, whether you're spending, a few $100s on a vintage Seiko or you're spending $17 million on a Patek Philippe. So,
and I mean, you've seen I own a two-tone Datejust from the 1970s. You've seen that watch. It's a great watch. It has factory service hands because when it went back to Rolex, before it came to me, Rolex decided that it needed new hands. And at a certain point, I still love the watch and it doesn't impact it for me. So I think we will at some point with these high value watches need to come to a place where there's an accepted standard of what is communicated at the very least. But we also have to remember that a lot of these watches, almost none of these watches were bought to be traded at auctions 70 years, 60 years, 50 years after they came out. They were bought by people who liked them and worn, in most cases, pretty hard. And so some of them are going to need restoration work.
Yep, I think that's fair. It's a really good point that people did not buy these watches to put them in a safe, even though some of them probably wound up in a safe. They were objects that were used, which is a very different kind of thing than like a piece of art that's hung on a wall. These things are worn on your body and they come into contact with the outside world. And, to draw another parallel with the art world, like even though the fine art world is, like mature in terms of how people, read this stuff at auctions, there's controversies there too. Like you can't escape it. And when it comes to an auction, people are always going to have concerns about authenticity and ownership, and it's part of it. It's baked into the fabric of how these things work. So yeah, unavoidable. You want to talk about some other lots in this auction? Was there anything else that like jumped out to you that was like particularly interesting result, or maybe like a good deal? So many watches I'm just scrolling through like sold above their estimate.
Yeah.
Kind of what they call a frothy environment, people wanting to spend money last weekend in Switzerland. But what else was of interest to you in this sale?
Well, I think one of the lots I'm seeing a lot of conversation about that had really good bidding in the room and over the phone when it was on the block was another Patek Philippe that sold in the Patek sale about 10 lot, or in the Philips sale about 10 lots before the 1518. And that's this asymmetric 3424 Patek platinum dress watch with diamond set case.
Yep.
That's designed by Gilbert Albert. I'm not
Gilbert
really sure
Albert, I think, is
but
very American here, so apologies.
But it's the first watch of his design that has sold for over $1 million US.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've seen over the last few years, I've seen a handful of his watches sell at various auctions, and they've been ticking up in value. And I think they've now passed this obvious threshold. And it's just a really cool watch. I mean, it feels very of the moment. Another of the same model watch, or the same design watch, but in gold and without the diamonds, also sold very strong in this, I believe, the next day of the sale. But I think it does speak to the ways in which modern taste affects how these vintage watches do. Yeah, here it sold the gold
because
version.
we're seeing this like interest in like smaller dress watches, shaped cases. It's reflected in sort of, all facets of the industry right now. We see micro brands releasing watches that are kind of, have this sort of look to them, and also like many, higher end brands too. This was this was one that jumped right out to me as well. It's always interesting when a watch sells for like several multiple times its estimate. This watch was estimated at between 100 and 200 thousand CHF, and sold for a little over 800,000 CHF, which, as you point out, is over $1 million US. It wasn't that long ago that like these Gilbert Albert watches were like somewhat under the radar and like somewhat, I wouldn't say accessible. They've always been, because they're Patek Philippe's, they've always been expensive, but they were, not like the blue chip, Patek Philippe's necessarily. And, now they are. Like it's a change that we've observed over the course of the last, few years, as interest in this type of watch has grown.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned kind of smaller brands, and I think one of the very cool things about the Phillips sale was the very first watch in the sale was an Atsuka Low-Tech number 5 that also sold for kind of an astronomical number.
Yeah, so that watch, so that's another one that jumped out to me, and I was going to bring this one up too, because I own this watch, and I saw this result, and I was like, oh my God, that's insane. So this watch sold for 21,000 roughly CHF, which in US dollars is what, like 35,000, something in that.
A little less than that, but yeah, high 20s certainly.
Okay.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. I got to say, I love this watch. I was wearing it the other day. It's fantastic. This is not a $30,000 watch. It's not a $20,000 watch. This watch has a Miyota movement, with a very cool module built on top of it. It's worth every penny I paid for it, in my opinion. I bought it at, the full retail price. But it's just wild that this watch, any Atsuka Low-Tech watch, these watches have achieved like this kind of like status now, like very, very, it seems very quickly. They've been around for a little while, but I think they've had like an international notoriety that's relatively recent. Congrats to them. Like it's a really impressive result. I'm very proud to own one. But man, like that's the kind of thing that you see at an auction where people are just ready to throw down and just spend a lot of money. And I think that this watch it's an interesting like, kind of like secondary example of something that's happening in the watch market that we can, look at alongside the Atsuka Low-Tech is Lot 41, which is another Japanese independent brand, Kikuchi Nakagawa. These are very, very low production, pretty high end, dress watches essentially. There's a very, very long wait list for these watches. I think that stretches out like decades, if I'm not mistaken. That watch sold for 64,000 CHF, roughly. Estimated was between $10,000 and $20,000, and I think it just reflects a real interest in Japanese independent watchmaking, which is like having a moment across like multiple interesting brands and multiple price points. So that was something I noticed right away, was that those two watches performed incredibly well because they're good watches, and I think because of like the rarity and the difficulty in obtaining them.
Absolutely. I think that it does speak to a level of interest. And, I think it speaks to an awareness that some of these brands deserve more attention than they're getting. And that's not to say they're not getting a lot of attention from nerds like us, but results like this can help. Whether or not you feel an Otsuka is worth $20, people are going to start paying attention to them more, and that can only be good for the brand.
Yep, 100%. Any other watches that jumped out to you from this sale? I have one other that I want to talk about. We already sort of touched on it, but I think it's worth. So I was just going to point out lot 144, which is the other 1518. There's a third one as
50.
well. Yeah, I think So the lot 144 is the pink on pink, which I think this is the one that I'd rather have. I'd rather, this is, listen, it's not we can't think of it as a bargain 1518 because it's, this one sold for 3.5 million CHF. But this to me, in terms of its aesthetics, is the most beautiful, execution of this watch, I think. So it's pink gold with a pink gold dial, just an incredible watch. Also sailed way past its high estimate, which is about 2.5 million CHF. Good night for 1518s, I think.
But I do think this is where it's worth mentioning that, the third 1518 that was in the sale, which was a yellow gold with a white dial, which is pretty much the most common version of the 1518.
Yep.
Also sailed past its estimate, but still only sold for 650,000 Swiss francs or 600,000 Swiss francs or something like that.
Yeah, so that one's the true, that's the bargain basement 1518.
But that's, it does, I think my understanding is there's a couple hundred of the yellow gold fins, significantly, maybe a few dozen of the pink gold fins, and 4 of the seal, and it does really show an escalation for rarity. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, that feels appropriate in that case. I think it was a very well done sale, and I think those results reflect it. We saw some of the same trends we've been seeing for the last few years. A lot of the form watch Cartier stuff did really well. A lot of the vintage Rolex did well, but we're now in a place where a lot of the vintage Rolex stuff is doing as well as the auction houses expect it to do instead of outperforming it.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a baseline expectation there, and the vintage Rolex stuff hits it, most of the time. But I think the days of surprising, shocking results for vintage Rolex are maybe behind us. And we're seeing that just translated elsewhere. The well-heeled collectors are just putting their money into things that they haven't put their money into before necessarily. It's just the cyclical nature of the hobby.
Yeah.
So this is obviously not the end of auction season. We've got the New York auctions coming up. What are you looking for, as we approach the next chapter in fall auction season?
Well, I mean, there's a lot, I think, for a watch nerd and who's also a movie nerd coming up in New York. You have not just, a few years ago, Francis Ford Coppola and F.P. Journe collaborated on a watch design that initially sold for only watch, and then they made a more standard production version of it. Standard production is maybe an overgenerous term, a very limited production version of it. But Francis Ford Coppola's prototype, his personal prototype, is coming up for sale in New York next month. And that's, for those who don't pay attention to this stuff, seemingly slightly to cover some of the costs of Megalopolis.
Well, I think it's more than seemingly. I think he's said on the record that making that movie cost him a lot of money, and he needs to recoup some of the costs. I would just like to point out, I saw Megalopolis in the theater. I paid full price for a ticket to see that at my local IMAX theater. So I did my part. I will not be bidding on the FP Journe to help Mr. Coppola, but I wish him well. And I hope other people see Megalopolis, I guess. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, Sotheby's has some incredible Lange stuff coming up in their New York sale. I think most exciting is possibly the Datograph Perpetual Tourbillon Lumen in honey gold. It's just a watch I've absolutely enamored by, and I will not be bidding on it. But it'll be cool to see how that does.
Yeah, there's some good stuff coming for sure, and I know you're a proponent of if you are able to actually to go to the previews, because it's a really good opportunity to see these things and get your hands on them. It can be a pretty special thing, particularly when you're dealing with some of these rare watches.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, we've talked about this before. I got into watches way too young, like dangerously young. But one of the things that really reinforced my affection for watches growing up was I had some family who worked at, my grandfather specifically worked at Sotheby's. And he would send me, initially it started with auction catalogs, and they're a great source of a lot of concentrated information. And then when I was old enough and respectful enough and was sure to behave myself, I was able to come and start going to previews. And it's a way of, I think Tony Trena put it out there the other day, or maybe it was Mark Kozlarek, but two friends who were kind of like, if you'd told me 5-6 years ago that I would ever get the chance to even see a 1518 in steel behind glass, I would have jumped at the opportunity. And by engaging with this auction world, not only did I get to see these watches, I got to wear them. And you can really, we stress this idea that knowledge is really important in collecting, and that's incredibly true. Some firsthand experience is also necessary. But unlike walking into an authorized dealer, auction houses tend to be, if you're respectful, if you're gonna, take it seriously, they're willing to really let you spend time expanding your horizons and seeing what's out there and understanding, and they'll help you understand why certain things are valued and others aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all open to the public.
Yep. No, it's a really good opportunity. People should take advantage of it if they have the chance to attend a preview for any of these auctions, or even like other auction. There's it's not just like the big auction houses that sell watches in this way. There's many regional auction houses that that focus on vintage watches and contemporary watches and all sorts of interesting things, and you can go there. They have previews, and you can handle stuff, and it's a good way to kind of educate yourself and get a crash course in horology for the cost of transportation, because like you said, these are open to the public. It generally doesn't cost anything to go to a preview, so definitely worth your while if you're into this stuff. Griffin, let's shift gears real quick. I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about the GPHG, because it literally just happened, and I don't think either of us have had time to fully digest the results. But the big headline coming out of the GPHG ceremony, which just ended, is the Grand Prix, or the top prize, the Aiguille d'Or, was won by Breguet. The Breguet Classique Description 2025 won the Aiguille d'Or, which is the top prize from the GPHG. What are you any quick thoughts coming out of that, coming away from that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally on board with that decision. I think weirdly, clearly that's not that hot a take because it won, but I think this is a watch that, in premise, a lot of people I've spoken to, a lot of people I've talked to in person and talked to online didn't necessarily think all that much of. I think it's easy to see the renders that they put out when the watch was launched and think, oh, that's nice. That's a really cool take on a Breguet. I don't know if you've seen this one in person. It's really special. I mean, it's
I have not seen this one in person.
Yeah, it's a remarkably special watch. And I think one auction we didn't talk about is Sotheby's this past weekend in Geneva did an auction of all Breguet, celebrating 250 years of Breguet, the brand and the watchmaker. And those watches are really foundational to what we think of as watches today. a lot of watch design, a lot of technical acumen has come out of Breguet. FP Journe, George Daniels, countless other great watchmakers got their start repairing Abraham Louis Breguet clocks. And I think this watch winning is a sign of real appreciation for that history and for the quality that you can still get from Breguet. I think they get ignored a lot because they're a Swatch Group brand now, and it's easy to just kind of be like, oh, it's Breguet. They make the slightly more expensive dress watches that, aren't Omegas. And they're still doing really, really cool stuff. And I think this is a deserving win.
Yeah, big moment for them, obviously. I think it was a little unexpected for this watch to win the Agui Tour. I heard there was a lot of, I think, talk around Urban Jurgensen, potentially winning this prize. They did win. I'm scrolling through results here. But I think the men's prize, the men's watch prize, the Urban Jurgensen UJ2 was the winner there. I mean, just looking through the winners, it feels like they kind of like they spread things around a little bit. I got to say, like there weren't like a ton. I don't see like a ton of like really surprising, like kind of like audacious picks here. One of the things that I clocked when I was kind of looking through all of the nominated watches, all the watches that are like submitted for consideration, and it should be noted, brands submit themselves for this competition. There's always like a ton of variety, and it feels like when it's time for the winners to be announced, it's sort of like a return to the mean. Like a lot of the obvious choices kind of like wind up winning, which is I guess fair and to be expected. They're obvious choices because they're really great watches made by great brands, but it I always love seeing like the little guys and the like the little indies and the approachable brands kind of like competing against like some of like the bigger kind of like more obvious stuff. And it doesn't seem like there's no like Rudy moment here. There isn't like a moment where like the underdog like really comes through and and topples the big titan. I guess that's more like Rocky than Rudy. Like Rudy was but you take my meaning, I think.
I understand.
I do want to call out Denison won the challenge prize. Like that's really exciting. They for their Tiger Eye dial, the time only. They're doing like a lot of really interesting stuff. I'm a big fan of Denison. This is, I think, the first year they were eligible post the relaunch of the brand. I could be wrong. Could be the second year. But anyway,
I think that is right. I mean, I think they certainly launched the brand after nominations were out last year. So this would have been the first.
Yeah, but I mean, there's always brands that kind of like don't really seem to exist publicly that that find themselves nominated because they submit themselves. So it's possible Denison was submitted last year. I'm not sure. Someone can fact check me on that. Still, for a brand like kind of like just starting out post relaunch, kind of a cool thing that they won. The other result that might be of interest to our listeners and readers is that the Petit Aiguille award went to the Mad Editions Mad 2. In green, so that's another like accessible watch. Relatively speaking,
and I can say this because I am not a voter. I'm not a part of the Academy. I love the Mad 2. There was a small part of me that was hoping that a digital quartz digital analog and a digi smartwatch from Moser was going to win. I thought that would have been a really fun twist on it.
Yep, and that's a cool watch. I spent some time with that watch. It's definitely it's an interesting piece. One of the more interesting things about so like this is like sort of like the inside baseball piece of this, but part of the like process of like submitting a watch and it being like eligible for the GPHG for voting is like there has to be a price attached to it.
Yeah,
and that Moser that we're talking about, the Anna Digimoser. I wrote about it. We can leave a link to it in the show notes. Was only sold with a much more expensive Moser. So like they never had to like publish a price on it publicly, but I think that they considered it like a $5,000 watch or something like that for the purposes of GPHG, which is just an interesting little kind of like nugget of information.
Yeah, but I think, I think what another interesting thing from the GPHG results is 2 brands that have recently been revived by LVMH, both won prizes.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Roth won the time only prize and Gerald Gento won the ladies watch. So, you pair that with Denison and that's 3 brands that basically didn't exist a year and a half ago or existed in only memory. Make that 4 if you throw in Angelus. So there is still this appetite for revival that is clearly showing through in these results. Yep,
for sure. Yeah, it's definitely, it's always interesting to see who wins these awards. I mean, I kind of think of it like the Oscars. Like, it doesn't matter, but it's still fun to think about. Like the awards are like not why we're interested in this stuff. At least, I speak only for myself, but it's still kind of like fun to consider it and fun to like think about the implications of which watches are chosen and why. So yeah, we'll have more on the website about the GPHG results soon, maybe even by the time this podcast goes up. And if that's the case, we'll link to that in the show notes.
I do think one last quick thought is, one of the things that is interesting about the GPHG is, okay, so Denison has now won a GPHG award. It only goes to this particular configuration of the watch.
Right.
So with a brand like Denison that has so much variety in their collection, I would have loved to be in the room as they were sitting there going through trying to decide which exact variation of the watch gets submitted.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Tiger's Eye is like the clear sort of like favorite. I mean, everyone will have their personal preferences, but like that's the one that you see, photographed, and it's like sort of like the social media darling. And it's just like, it just looks so good in that gold case. Yeah. So yeah, like to me, that's a pretty obvious choice, but you're right. Like they'll have even more to choose from next year when it's time to submit, because they keep growing. Griffin, thanks for the chat about the auctions and GPHG. Let's move on to cultural recommendations. Back again this week. Tell me what you got. Give us a recommendation, something we can watch, read, visit, consume in some manner.
Well, I'm going to go for visit. And apologies to anyone who can't get to Boston in the next few months. But I'm going for an exhibit at the Museum of Fine Art in Boston. This is an absolutely incredible museum in Boston, kind of right near Fenway Park, right near, the heart of old school Boston. But they have an exhibit running right now. It opened just at the beginning of November, and it's running till close to the end of January. So if you're going to come to Boston through the holidays, come to New England through the holidays, they are doing an exhibit highlighting Winslow Homer's watercolors called Of Light and Air. I went just this week, and it's really a stunning exhibit. It's beautifully curated. Winslow Homer is well known for his watercolors, but I think is probably better known for his oil paintings. And this is a side of his work that is hard to understand if you can't see it in person. Watercolors don't translate well to screens. There's a depth to them that just vanishes. And I think I will probably go see this exhibit again. So you may even run into me there.
Well, I mean, there can't possibly be a better reason to go than that. You might run into, worn and wound contributors, staffers at the MFA in Boston. What could be better than that? That's a good recommendation, Griffin. Thank you. I co-sign on the MFA recommendation just in general. It's a great museum. Highly recommend checking it out, whether you go for Winslow Homer or any of the other great exhibits that are permanent display at the MFA. It's a wonderful, wonderful museum in Boston. My recommendation is a book that I've just kind of started leafing through. My mom got this for me for my birthday last month. It's called The Devil Reached Toward the Sky. It's an oral history of the making and unleashing of the atomic bomb. It's by Garrett Graff. I've just sort of, like I said, I've just sort of started flipping through it, but it's really pretty bracing and pretty interesting. if you've seen Oppenheimer or read the book that Oppenheimer is based on, which I believe is called American Prometheus, I think is the title of that book, which is another book that it sits on my nightstand, and I've read big chunks of it, but like I can't claim to have read through the whole thing yet. This is like a different side of that. This book by Garrett Graff kind of is more, I mean, it's a little bit more technical and a little bit more like boots on the ground. It focuses, the scope is much larger than just Oppenheimer. So really fascinating. Definitely recommended if you like, the Christopher Nolan film, which I do very much and I've returned to many times. I think that's why my parents got this for me, is because like I always kind of just like make jokes about, I'm going to go rewatch Oppenheimer again. It's going to become a running joke. I think they think I've seen that movie an unhealthy amount of times, but I haven't. It's just a joke. Sorry. But yeah, no, it's cool stuff. It's a big honking like thick book with a lot of like, primary sources. So yeah, The Devil Reached Toward the Sky. Read a book, folks.
Yeah.
Books are great.
An oral history without primary resources would be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like, there's a lot of like, diagrams and photography and like it's pretty interesting. So we'll leave a link for that in the show notes as well. Griffin, thanks again for coming on. And thanks to everyone for listening in this week on the podcast. We appreciate it as always. And we will be back next week with another all new episode. Until then, take care.